Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. And today I'm reviewing Ignite, a deck-building skirmish game from Ginger Snap Gaming. Ignite's a deck builder, a classic deck builder. If you've ever played any deck builder, you're going to do the classic whole having a hand of cards, drawing your hand of cards, building out a deck as you go through the game, upgrading and improving upon the deck. The part where Ignite stands out, where Ignite is a bit different, is the nature of it being a skirmish game. The nature of you having a board, you having your various miniatures, stabbing each other in the back, literally with a bag full of daggers over here. You'll be stabbing each other in the physical back until one character has 3 daggers, and the person who attributes, who puts in the 3rd dagger will get the kill and get the trophy as a result. And trophies are how you win the game. Ultimately at Ignite, it's about building that deck that will keep you alive, that will hurt others, that will damage others as you try to land that last killing blow and gather enough trophies to win before other players do so. That's the core. Past that, it's deck building. It's deck building with a board, deck building with a market, and you're going to have all these little areas around the board, and the board size is variable depending on the player count, but you'll have these areas around the board where you can go ahead and buy cards. The more characters you have in the external markets, the more cards you can buy. Additionally, you have the center area that players will vie for, because in the center area, in the center market, as you get into there, for each character in the center market, you can go ahead and sell. For each character you have in the second market, you can sell or weed your own cards from the deck. So these cards that may or may not be helping you depending on the situation, that may or may not be useful, the cards that will upgrade if you want to weed your deck, which is often what my favorite thing to do in deck building games, well, then you have to make your way to the center market. That's where you can sell the cards, although there are some cards in the box that will let you sell cards otherwise. But if you don't have those, or if you're not playing with those, or if you want to sell more cards, you can do so from the center market, making it an area on the board that players are vying for, players are moving towards, players are getting there, so they can most efficiently build the deck, the best deck possible. Because that's the whole game. Build the best deck, use the best spells, combine your arrows with your bows, combine your melee weapons and the cards that augment off melee weapons as you figure out how to take down others, as you figure out how to use the cards themselves, the damage in the cards, the terrain effects. This game has a lot of terrain elements in here. Terrain elements such as the fact that when you burn the fire, when you burn something in a forest, that burning will spread across the entire forest. You light this section of the forest ablaze, and that will spread all the way down to this person. The same is true with water and ice. You do something that has an ice effect on water, it'll carry over across the entire water. You push somebody into this lava over here, this magma, and they instantly die, and there are a lot of cards that manipulate how players move. Yes, it takes 3 damage to kill a character, but an arrow that pushes them back a space into lava, or a tangling vine that pulls them in, that's a different conversation. That can be an insta-kill, completely depriving your opponent of the fact that they have a dagger or 2 in their back, and instantly going for just a straight up kill, taking them down, and gathering that as a trophy. That's the core game. There's details to cover, there's other things, so the basic sequence is draw your hand of cards, play your hand of cards to take the actions on those cards, which often involve moving or attacking or some sort of ability of any kind, or use those cards, use those cards to buy more cards to build out a better deck, and do so better than the other players, until eventually one player gets enough trophies and wins. Past that, it comes down to the cards themselves, because the cards themselves we have a whole bunch of. Now, I'm not going to heavily go into everything. What I will show you is, off the bat, I'll show you the fact that we have this entire card row full of cards. In any given game, you're going to have 16 cards. There's a lot of variety, and that's important because cards can combo with other cards. You can have a lot of sets that work well together. You have a good combination of melee weapons, of spells, of bows and arrows, of things that work well. Having a quiver so you can hold on to your arrows until your bow comes up so you can actually shoot them. You're going to be combining things in different ways, and these cards have anything. Let's go ahead and read some variety of abilities, just going through what we can have over here. Over here, we have a magic potion bomb. It's a range of 1 to 2. It costs you 5. It's worth 2 if you're using it to buy more cards. Costs you 5. A range 1 to 2. So 1 to 2 away could be, for instance, this character over here attacking that character over there. That would work here. Place 1 magic potion bomb token. At the beginning of your next turn, any unit on or adjacent to it takes 1 damage. Any unit 2 spaces away discards a random card. So this is going to screw with your opponents, forcing them out of range. You do that over here. You do that in a spot like this, and you're forcing other players to scatter or suffer the consequences. And the consequences could be, well, fun depending on who you are. If we go ahead and grab this weapon, we have pikes. A pike will be a melee weapon. We have a range of 6 over here, range 1, damage 1, a cost of 6, a value of 2, range 1, damage 1. If a non-flying mount tries to ride through one of your units, you may reveal this card to force the enemy unit to stop adjacent to you and be knocked down. Like in real life, a pike can be utilized to deprive mounted units from their advantage, and pikes can be, well, fun. Because one thing we didn't talk about, many of the small little adjacent rules we didn't really get to, is mounted units can charge you over, knocking you down, which can be a lot of of fun. Speaking of which, we have a horse over here. Horse, which will give you a movement. It'll cost you 7, be value of 2, and it gives you a movement of 1 to 3. Your typical march cards that you start with will give you movement of 1, and even as you upgrade cards, in general, if a card has movement 2, you have to do movement 2, but horse gives you movement 1 to 3, which gives you a lot of flexibility. If we grab this Warhammer, let's see what this Warhammer does. We have a Warhammer, cost 8, value 3, which can really help you. Just getting that card into your deck will really help you buy more and more cards, but it has a range 1, damage 3. Wow, can only be used on a knockdown unit, cannot be blocked. You use your mount to charge down another unit to just knock them down entirely and then step out with your Warhammer and destroy it, and they cannot block it. That can be incredibly impactful. Incredibly impactful. Speaking of which, we have a Tiger mount. I'm not going to do this for the rest of the video. I'll do this for a few more cards. Cost of 9, value of 2, movement 1 to 2. If your unit is adjacent to an enemy unit after moving, the Tiger may attack at damage 1. So this gives you both movement flexibility and an extra hit, which means you could go ahead, target that unit that has 1 damage, and just completely destroy it because you'll deal your own damage from your own weapons, although it may block it or not, and the Tiger will attack as well. And we have Ring of Fire. We'll do one more after this. Ring of Fire, value of 0, so you do have to consider strongly whether you add that to your deck, but at cost of 9, it causes 1 damage to every unit in a circle around your unit, a 3x3 grid, a complete circle around your unit, with your unit in the center. Discard an additional card to extend the damage to every unit in a 5x5 grid. That Ring of Fire, the reason it costs 0 is because you do that. If you're over here right now, if you're this character, this panda over here, and you pop that Ring of Fire off and you do so with discarding a card, you're going to deal damage to every single unit in that range. Granted, one of them is your own fellow panda, but we can cleverly avoid that by stepping back first with the movement 1, pop it off, deal damage to a whole bunch of stuff, and just hurt them. And that, I said one more, so let's do one more. Let's do one more. Let's do Quick Hands. Ooh, Quick Hands is a fun one. Quick Hands. Quick Hands, a value of 3 again, a cost of 11, value of 3, which again helps you. Draw 1 card each time you attack an enemy unit this turn. Quick Hands is excellent because you can combine that with a strong attack deck to continuously keep drawing cards. One of the problems with attacking is attacking can be defended against if you have the right cards. It is situational, but if you have the right cards, you can defend against an attack, you can sidestep, you can do all these things. Having the ability to draw more cards as you attack means your opponent is using their cards to slowly evade your attacks, but they'll have fewer and fewer cards even as you are drawing more and more. And that basically is Ignite. The races, the classes all have their own abilities. There's some adjacent rules. There's solo play. Well, the solo play with the expansion, I should be more specific. There's a variety of terrain effects, other things we haven't gotten into fully. There's a concept of death. We should cover that. When a player dies, when a player is out of the game, when all 3 of their players are out of the game, you do have a death mode, where they become a bit of a water creature wandering around, pinging the other players, still being present in the game. Something I don't love, but we'll talk about that shortly. And with that, let's go ahead and segue into the review, starting off with ease of play. The game is pretty easy to teach. I mean, honestly, I'd spend part of this review just covering the cards so you have a sense of what happens in this game, because that's where the bulk of the details come in. For the most part, if you've played a deck building game, this is a deck building game. You start with your basic deck, you're going to be going through the process of building out and improving upon the deck, and past that, you just do what the cards say. There's some rules. There's terrain effects, so you do want to know what those are, so you have your little handy player guide of covering the terrain effects, showing you how they work, but they're not that complicated. There's not that many. There's some rules about the marketplace, how those work, and the fact, one thing I didn't touch upon is when you are in the market, when you are in those external markets, you do take 2 damage, so you have a kind of you want to keep your characters so they can buy more cards, but also if somebody can get close enough to you fast enough, they can just hit you for 2, which means you're going to die pretty fast, so there's things like that. But the game is very easy to teach, fairly easy to table. There's a lot of card space. The nature of having 16 cards on the table does mean that the biggest pet peeve I would have as far as ease of play is the fact that, especially your first game, until you know the cards, until you start to learn those cards, you're going to have 16 cards you have to absorb, 16 cards that are probably not immediately within distance, and 16 cards that, as well as it, let's go ahead and show you this over here, they have a marbleized background on the cards, which makes it look very nice, but when it's across from the table, it's not as easy to see, and it could have been a bit better in that sense, especially just because of the volume of cards. It's not a big deal, but for that first play, especially when you don't know anything, it might take a few turns before you have a sense of the various cards there. But past that, ease of play is pretty solid all around. As far as player count, this is a large player count game. This is a 1 to 8 player game with the expansion and a 2 to 8 player game otherwise. I've played this game at 2, 3, and 4 players. I have not played the solo mode. 2, 3, and 4, just all of them work fine. I would say I prefer 3 and 4 from a sense of the general gameplay experience, but 2 does remove a pet peeve I have about the game and about a mechanic that the game utilizes. Specifically the aspect that this game has that finishing off mechanic, the idea that you can deal 2 daggers to a character and I can walk in for the 3rd dagger and sweep the kill from underneath you. I don't love that in games. Some people will argue that's a strategic element, you have to be mindful of what and where, and that's all true. I just don't like a game that disincentivizes me from striking that first blow because you might get there and sweep the kill. So when you're playing a 2-player game, you have that direct head-to-head, and that removes that one negative. But despite that, I think I prefer it at 3 and 4 players because I think I have a better time in the overall experience, even though I feel 2 takes away an element that I don't like. So 2, 3, and 4, all good in that sense. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, first of all, this is a deck building game. I like deck building as a mechanic and a genre to begin with. It is probably my second favorite mechanic after drafting. I enjoy deck building, and the cards in this game are cool. The cards in this game, even right now, there was like 1 or 2 cards that I saw there. I think Ring of Fire, I knew Ring of Fire, I did. I've played with this a long time ago. This is actually the card I played with my first game, but I haven't played this in any of my recent games. I was like, ooh, Ring of Fire. Like, Ring of Fire is a solid card. You use that to just cast just giant fireballs across everyone. You pop up ice walls. You shove people into lava. The cards and combinations here are insanely cool. The fact that you can do a ton of things just makes you feel... It makes you feel powerful. It makes it feel fun. It makes you feel like you can do so much because you can do so much. You are building a deck. I enjoy the process of building a deck in many games as long as they give me enough of a reason why I actually care. And this game, Ignite, definitely gives me a reason why I care. There's a lot of fun things happening here, a lot of powers and abilities, a lot of just hosts of cool cards. And I haven't even gone through the expansion yet. I have the expansion. I have not gone through it. It's just more cards, more abilities, more fun things that you can do. All of them giving you tools. And the fact that there's 16 on the table means you have that card market. In general, I prefer deck building games that have a card market as opposed to a rotating card row because it gives me that sense of actual planning as opposed to I'll just buy what happens to come up at the moment. And so that sense of planning is present. It's very present when you have 16 cards to go through and you're trying to think through what deck do you envision yourself building out, and also how will you pivot and adjust as you're playing the game. But I'm going to combine that melee card because that's going to work really well. I'll combine that battle axe. I'll get that mount so I can charge you over and then strike you down with the hammer as you're on the ground. You can envision the card deck that you're building, you can envision the tools at your disposal, and you can use that to start crafting towards a cool combination of powers and abilities, which is generally what I love. And then terrain elements add to that more. The fact that you have terrain, which is not overly impactful, I'd say. I would say in general the terrain, well, that's not entirely true. I would say these little lava spots, they heavily played into almost every game I've played of Ignite. The fact that there's just the cognizance and the awareness that these are in play, as long as you have even one ability that messes with players' movement, it means every player is being very mindful of what they do, how they position themselves, because they know full well that there's something that will push or pull them into an insta-kill. Those are a big deal. The ice and the terrain and the forest, the ice and the forest over there, I find those are less impactful. We have had games where those do come into play, but we've also had games where they don't really come into play that much at all, and so, although forest does have an effect in arrows as well, so that comes to play a bit more. But yeah, I would say the overall terrain has definitely been present in every single game we've played to some degree, some games more than others depending on the card deck. Past that, the center market as well. Center market gives you something to vie over. The center market gives you a place that you're trying to go, because without the center market, and we'll get to this in the things I don't like, without the center market you would have absolute turtling as players just sit in the corner building your own deck before they go into battle. The center market at least gives you a reason to head out. It gives you a reason as far as if you want the best deck possible, you may have to venture forth into danger. You may have to venture forth into the center of the board so you can actually go ahead and do the things that you need over there, because you can build a better deck and get rid of all those bad cards, especially if you have nothing else that helps you weed, and this is the way to do it. But then the problem is there's going to be someone else right next to you in the center market, and suddenly your daggers and your shields are being utilized to protect yourselves and keep yourselves alive. The center market is very, very present in the game. As far as things I don't like in the game, there are a few as well. The whole things I do like, there's a lot that I like about Ignite, but there's also complaints that I do have. The first is the fact that the game does very heavily have that build, explode mechanism. Meaning you're spending your entire game building out a deck. You are. And yes, you do want to vie for the center market. The center market does improve it a bit by giving you some reason to venture forth. At the end of the day, when you play Ignite though, while you will explore and dabble with the center market to a degree, and while there will be minor clashes, most of the game is about, like, the game comes in at, depending on the gameplay, but I'd say roughly around 90 minutes to 2 hours generally for us, probably close to 90 minutes, and I would say that's usually about 60 minutes of building and preparing and building out your deck, and the last half hour is the execution, where you start really trying to aggressively pursue and jump into action. Now, players might play this differently, this might be a game group kind of thing, but the way our game group approaches this is we build, then explode. That's not inherently a bad thing, it just feels like a skirmish game, which the skirmishing is primarily in the last third of the game. I still enjoy it, but it's certainly worth noting. Past that, the village sidelines, the whole peripheral edge of the board over here, feels completely unnecessary. It feels tacked on. It feels like it's a whole giant area of the board. I mean, if you look at this board right here, this is a 2 to 4 player setup over here, and if you look at this board, this is a whole lot of everything. A whole lot of everything as far as just gray space. That doesn't look great either, by the way, from an art standpoint. I don't love the board. I like the cards. The card art I like a lot. The board art, not so much. And it feels like there's a whole lot of it devoted to something that doesn't matter that much. It's a spot where you retreat to a degree to build some cards, and you kind of have to have a player there. I kind of wish the game had completely abandoned the entire sidelined market approach, and had just gone with the fact that, hey, you can build cards. Ta-da! There you go. Center market, yes, you can sell cards. That's very important. I wish it had abandoned the entire outside edge of the board and just gone heavily with a, instead of a 2x4, gone with like a 3x3 or whatever it is, depending on player count and all that stuff, just grid of just excessive in-your-face combat. None of this, double market, double damage, but you can buy cards. I don't care for the outer edge of the board at all. Additionally, the death mechanic. I don't like the death mechanic, to the point that we stopped playing with it after our first game. At this point, when we play Ignite, or the subsequent games we've played of Ignite so far at least, we stopped using the whole, hey, I'm dead now and I got to ping you from the grave. No, we just went with the fact that you're dead, we'll be done in a minute, it's okay. And it is okay for us. While there is player elimination in the game, because of the fact that the whole game is build, explode, player elimination for us has always been a handful of minutes. Well, a handful might be a bit extreme, but I don't think a player's been out of play for more than 10 minutes when we've played Ignite. Usually by the time it hits that point, it's the end game, it's in the last, 20 minutes of a 90-minute game, and someone eventually gets knocked out. So the player elimination for us has not been an issue, but a fiddly death mechanic where you feel like you're kind of in the game, but not really, and just slowing things down, not a fan of that either. And then lastly, in the part I mentioned already, I'm not a fan of the last person takes the kill mechanic. From a sense of whether the game is fun, whether Ignite is fun and enjoyable, absolutely. To the point that I prefer 3 and 4 players, even though 2 players takes away that element. So I prefer it at 3 and 4 players. I prefer it with more fun, more whatever. But yes, there is a dagger in the back mechanic in which the person who gets that eventual dagger takes the entire kill, and I don't love that. Something I have talked about with the designer at one point for the very first time I played this game is the idea that maybe you just count the daggers you earn, maybe you earn daggers instead of the kill. There are ways you can house rule around it. For me, I don't know if I care enough. I play Ignite to have fun, and I still have fun playing Ignite, but from a pure strategic aspect, I just am not a fan of the mechanic in which the last person takes the blow. Takes the trophy. As far as I can see others not liking, first of all, some cards will feel overpowered. That doesn't bother me in games with an open market because, hey, if a card's overpowered, we should all go for it to a degree. Or just don't use that card. But there certainly are cards that feel like they're a little bit more broken than others, at least if I understand them correctly. And there certainly are just combinations that might seem more appealing depending on how you build the market. To me, it's kind of up to the players to figure that out. The player who figures out the combination once you put the cards out, well, that's what they did. That is the game. The game, to me, is figuring out the optimal build given a market of 16 cards. But you might find it frustrating if you tried going for an arrow and bow deck in a market that didn't really suit an arrow and bow deck, and someone else went with a much more powerful build based on that market. Secondly, there's a lot of cards to look at. Like I said already, I kind of touched upon this already in the accessibility aspect, but you're going to have a ton of cards in this game, a ton of abilities, and it will be overwhelming at first. And that's something that you kind of have to deal with the fact that your first game or two, you're going to be learning more cards. Your second game will be easier than the first because you'll remember that, the mount does that or this does that. You'll remember a few things, you'll pick it up, but it will take a few games before you don't have to constantly look at the market and be overwhelmed with 16 new cards of information. As far as final thoughts with Ignite, I'm torn on this one. To be very clear, I'm not torn in the sense that I enjoy the game. I very much enjoy the game. I do. But there's also enough elements around the core gameplay that make it a game that I really, really, really like, but I kind of want a second version of the game, if that makes sense. I kind of want the elements of Ignite that I love without some of the fiddliness that I just don't care for. I like deck building in general, and I like skirmish games in general, and deck building with skirmish, the fact that I can just parade around the board, building my deck and swarm in and start executing on those cards, and combine that with the terrain effects, combine that with popping up an ice wall that both sends an enemy back and shoots an enemy into a lava pit. There are incredibly cool moments that happen in this game, and I really enjoy that. Every time I look at the cards, I want to build out a new pathway. I want to build out a deck that has a few mounts and those warhammers to just sweep across the board with the speed and fury of the mounts and take people down with the war axes, even as someone shoots me off into a lava pit along the way. It is full of cool, amazing moments. It's also full of a market that I just don't care for, the sideboard that I don't care for. It also has a death mechanic that, in terms of it's the after death that I don't really care for, and it has the element that the last player takes the trophy that I don't care for. There's a lot here that I really, really like, and there's a bunch of nitpicks that also make it really good, but dependent on the gameplay I'm in. As far as rating this, a 3.5 out of 5 for me. This is one where I can easily see it going up if a few things were different. I really enjoy the deck building. I really enjoy the combat. I really enjoy the cool moments of the game. And I don't love the entire tense, slow build-up towards that, and the fact that the entire game is kind of pushing you into the external market for a large part of that experience. So overall positive, but with nitpicks and critiques. As far as other game recommendations, I have Dominion. Dominion is going to be one of my go-to deck builders. Dominion very much has a similar sense of build, explode as Ignite does, in the sense that you're building that deck before you eventually start trying for those victory point cards to load up your deck. The difference is that that feels like the entire game is about that, and doesn't feel like it's meant to be a skirmish game. It feels that is the game. And then secondly, and once we're talking about deck building skirmish games, I haven't played it, but Ascension Tactics. You'd have to try, if you're interested in deck building skirmish games, Ascension Tactics, I believe, is the only other well-known deck building skirmish game out there. And so if you like that genre, if you've enjoyed Ignite and want to see other things like it, or if you've played Ascension Tactics and want to see if this one works for you, well, they're both deck building skirmish games. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, have a good one.